Welcome to Philanthropy SA. This is a podcast about and for the philanthropic community in San Antonio and South Texas. We introduce organizations and people who are making an impact in the community. Beneficent Financial is proud to sponsor this podcast, and it is our hope that you enjoy this conversation about the impact we can have. The goal is to edify and inspire. Now please join our host, Dan Rebmann.
Hi, welcome to Philanthropy SA. I'm your host, Dan Rebmann, and very pleased to be joined today by Fraser Scott. Fraser came all the way from New Zealand. He was escaping winter, and
it's true.
And here it is. And so you can't, what says escaping winter better than San Antonio? Although if you can prove you brought this rain to us, you could monetize that and you'd be in great shape.
It has got cooler since I got here, and I'm very grateful for that.
So Fraser, aside from traveling from New Zealand and bringing rain, is also the executive director of Bright Hope World. And that is an organization based in New Zealand, but does great stuff all over the world. And so the first question, people who listen regularly to my podcast, and of those people, I only know one, which is my mom. But
thanks, Mom.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to be asking, so what does that have to do with San Antonio? And so normally we talk about organizations that are based here in San Antonio and serve here in San Antonio. And today we're going to take a different tack. This is an organization that is supported by folks in San Antonio, along with folks around the world. And they are doing some amazing things. And the way they approach what they do is really why I wanted to have Fraser on today, along with getting to hear about the great stuff. But I just think your approach is unique and something that a lot of other nonprofits could actually benefit from, taking a look at sort of the methodology, I think,
Sure.
of what you do. So before we get into that, though, I normally ask people what brought you to San Antonio. I know you periodically travel here to San Antonio, and but tell us about New Zealand. You, I'm assuming, were born and bred.
Yeah. Born in our biggest city, which is Auckland. That has about 1 million people. You would call that a suburb here, I think. And that's a big chunk of our population. I live in Christchurch, down in the South Island, Alpine area. Pretty beautiful, but it was hit by an earthquake. Some people will remember about 12 years ago. And but it's doing pretty good, and we love it. It's a good country to live in.
Well, we're glad that you're here. I came to know about Bright Hope World, I guess, 1.5 years, 2 years ago. You were in town, and Biblical Leadership for Excellence was having an event.
That's right.
And had you speak at it. And I just was wowed and amazed. So why don't you do the quick,
the elevator pitch?
Yeah, the what does Bright Hope World do? And then I really want to do a deeper dive on how you do it and sort of the philosophy behind it.
Sure. Our vision is to focus on the poorest of the poor. And within that, the poorest of the poorest of the poor. So we're going to the places in the world that you would imagine when you think of the poorest of the poor in the Middle East and parts of South America, Central and Southern Africa particularly, and down into South Asia and Southeast Asia. And within those communities, we have a real heart for women, children, people with disabilities that are even within those communities at the bottom of the heap. And what we gravitate towards is what we would call holistic mission. So we're passionate about spiritual self-sustainability and physical self-sustainability. We want to lift people out of poverty, to work with people to be lifted out of poverty, but that entails the gospel, because when you want to work with people in poverty, when you want to make a change, a transformation, that you've got to hit the heart, you've got to hit the mindsets. So we're angling in both of those directions, but it's not us doing these things. We're a resource, we're a partner, and our focus is finding exceptional people on the ground, local Indigenous people. They know the culture, they know the language, they know the issues, they have the strategy, and they're already doing it. But our job is to come alongside them, to be an accountability layer and a monitoring partner, sure, but to be kind of wind in their sails, to help push them forward, to help grow what they're doing, and to work with them on strategies that they lead that will make a difference in their communities. And that's what it's all about.
That's great. And one of the things that you mentioned there, and that this is one of the things that I think is so important to the way that you provide this help. We're going to come back in a minute because I want to talk about how you view poverty, because that's, I think, very interesting as well. But first, you mentioned working with local people to help solve those problems, and kind of walk us through what it is that makes that so important for the success of the programs that you support.
Sure. And let me say as a writer, before I begin, is we're not an organization that's anti-missionary or anti-sending of people, because there are places in the world that really need that. But our heart and our focus is on people that exist, that live within these communities, that know them inside out, that don't need to spend years learning all of those things. And one of the consistent things that we see is wherever we go in the world, however remote and isolated, there are always people that God is working through in those communities. Our job and indeed our core competency as a ministry is to find those people. And we're often asked, how do we find them? There's no good answer for that. People say, hey, you should go talk to that guy in the next village. He's doing some really impressive stuff. One partner, I just bumped into him in an airport. We got talking. I was blown away by what he did. We went and met him. He became a partner. It is really what we would call divine appointments that helps us find these people. But what we find is they're committed to these places, these people for life. They're accepted by the communities. They're part of the communities. And, they stay and see these things through for years. And because the space that we are in, which is development, is transforming a community longitudinally over time, that's measured in decades. So you want people that are integrated into the community that will go the journey. That's why we do it that way.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the poorest of the poor and that type of thing. When we look at that and you talk about poverty, you don't define poverty as an absence of financial resources.
No, well, yes and no. I mean, as a shorthand, poverty being people that earn less than $2 a day is a good start. It's a good place to look. But the problem with poverty is that we have in the West traditionally approached it as an absence of resources. So you throw resources at the problem, but so often it seems to get worse. And it's no different. Poverty is no different here than it is there. So if you imagine if you have a group of people in a very poor community, perhaps there's drug abuse, there's domestic abuse, there's all of these sort of issues that we tend to associate with poverty. And then you go dump a bunch of money in that community, you would expect that wouldn't go that well. Poverty anywhere is the same. So what we find, how we understand poverty, and this takes getting some, your head around, is poverty is about relational breakdown. And I would recommend a book called When Helping Hurts that explains this far better than I can. But if you see that poverty is caused by how people relate to God, how people relate to their community, to themselves, and to creation. And when those relationships break down, then you get poverty. That's tough to get your head around. But if you think of it in terms of a community, when you have ethnic tension in a community and relationships break down, people are excommunicated from communities or things are stolen from communities, and you can quickly see how that results in poverty. If you are a person who thinks you have no worth and nothing you do will ever achieve, and you stop working, you can see how poverty will result from that. So what we find is we need to attack these mindsets that we find in communities that are stricken by poverty. And only when we've started to address that, to say you do have value, you are created in the image of God, you have value. The land is not cursed against you. If you plant, it will grow. You've got to do that work and then bring resources to bear judiciously, strategically, very carefully in the right place at the right time, and then you can start to lift poverty out. But if you don't address that spiritual element, how people view themselves and others, then you can never form a community together. It's always rife with tension and conflict. Part of the issue that goes alongside that is dependency. So, the minute you give $1, you start a clock ticking on dependency. You rob people of dignity because they're getting a handout. And for men, in most of the world at least, particularly, when they're no longer able to provide for their families, when someone is having to do it for them, you're pressing them down, you're robbing them of dignity, a sense of self-worth, and you can potentially perpetuate poverty with that kind of approach. Our approach is always about self-sustainability. How do we help these people to provide for their own needs, to send their own kids to school, to grow their own crops, to start their own business? Because then you're building people up. And if you can disengage, if you can step back and allow that to just go, that's wonderful. That's when you see people really thrive.
And so the purpose here then is to help them self-sustain, help them be able to manage. Basically, you want to have them grow to the point where they no longer need your help. I mean, at least need your help financially.
Yeah, that's the ideal. I mean, we work in more than 30 countries. We have about 200 partnerships that we're working with, that we're visiting, that we're spending time with. But only about 2/3 of those are we having to put funds into. And we're constantly looking to graduate people out of that space. We have plenty of partners that simply do not need funds from us anymore, even in very difficult places, because they're well set up to generate the funds locally for the ministry they do. You can imagine the empowerment that brings.
Absolutely. And the tremendous, I would imagine it's a situation where when you're talking to potential partners, and if they're reluctant to get help from the sense of pride or the sense that you were talking about earlier, you can give them specific examples of people who look, this is somebody we helped, and now, they're providing for themselves. And in fact, you shared a story with me earlier today before we started recording about, people who did so well. They said, here's your money back, and we're good, and we don't,
Yeah, there's a guy, a great friend in Nepal. His name's Naranjan. He is an entrepreneur. He's got a little travel agency. He opened gyms and cafes. He's just that kind of guy. You translocate him here, and he'd be running some pretty big businesses. But he loves his community. He works there. He started loan programs to help other people start small businesses, of which he did a bunch. He would help them and support them. We gave him a pretty big loan to do a bunch of medium-sized businesses. And we gave him 5 years. He'd pay back over 5 years. 18 months later, he'd paid the whole thing back. We didn't want to repatriate the funds. So we said, well, you find somewhere else to invest them. And he said, I've kind of already done that. I don't need these funds, and send them back. That's not typical, but it's wonderful because he's still a friend, he's still a partner, but that community is on its way. We can just watch and enjoy what God's doing there.
And how many years has the organization been doing this? And kind of were you there at the foundation? Or
I was not. There's a man called Rob Perdue who founded a successful businessman in New Zealand that just really felt called to do ministry in a really lean way. He'd traveled, he'd seen. I'll be careful with my words here. He'd seen organizations with big white four-wheel drives driving around using a lot of funds, and was just committed to do a ministry that was focused exclusively on the needs of the people in those local communities, that didn't waste a lot of money on itself. So all our team, there's 30 plus of us. We all volunteer our time. We're not paid. We pay our travel costs, and that's just out of a deep conviction and love for the people that we serve. We don't, we say every dollar we use is a dollar they lose. So that was the basis for the ministry, and so we'll be going more than 30 years now. I've been there half that time, so I can't take credit for all the wisdom that's contained in it.
No, that's awesome in terms of the. That mindset of serving folks and helping in that way. And certainly, lean the notion that every dollar that you use on something else is not going to help, the people that you're ultimately serving, which are your partners. I know that you're a faith-based organization in terms of a ministry and that type of thing. Do you serve people regardless of their beliefs?
Yeah, we do. I mean, everywhere we work, we're looking to reach into communities that don't know the Lord. So a lot of countries we're working with Muslim communities, always through Christians, always through the local church and through Christians, but they're constantly reaching into Buddhist communities, into Hindu communities, into Muslim communities, into animistic communities. So the beneficiaries are often of different faiths. But as are working with those communities and looking to alleviate poverty, the gospel is always part of that, because the gospel is always part of alleviating poverty. So the number of people coming to faith through our partners is staggering, is enormous. And ultimately we want to see, as the Lord does, everyone come to faith. We want to see everyone being lifted out of poverty, but we believe that work needs to be done by believers.
Understood. And we're going to take a moment here to hear from our sponsor, and then we're going to get the San Antonio connection to the organization and Fraser Scott. So we'll be right back.
Many of you out there care deeply about wanting to make an impact on the world around you. You want to help take care of the people and organizations that are important to you. We understand that because we feel the same way. Beneficent Financial wants to help you. Our mission is to help people like you with professional, individualized financial advice achieve their objectives. Whether your financial legacy will stay within your family or benefit the community at large, we are able to help. Call Beneficent Financial today at 210-999-5511. In addition to traditional wealth management, we offer philanthropic services such as direct donations of required minimum distributions, donor-advised funds, and foundations. Call 210-999-5511 or go online to beneficentfinancial.net. Let us help you do well so you can do good. Securities offered through Momentum Independent Network, member SIPC/FINRA.
Thanks for joining us today on Philanthropy SA. I'm your host, Dan Rebmann. We've got the Executive Director of Bright Hope World, Fraser Scott. So I got to meet you by way of you were coming to San Antonio, and I know there's a group of people in San Antonio who help support the organization. Tell me about the relationship with San Antonio and how that came to be. And I know you travel a lot of places to update people, but why is San Antonio on that list?
Well, if I had to be honest, if there was a place in the U.S. I could come hang out, it would be San Antonio. I know that sounds like I just love it here. So it does feel like a second home. I've been coming here for a long time. But our connection was with a local entrepreneur and businessman, Chad McNair. We met him about 15 years ago. We do a coffee business out of Thailand, and through a church that we were connected with in Dallas. And we approached Chad and said, would you roast the coffee down here? He came to New Zealand and we met him, and then I started coming over, and we just kind of worked together, and he had a real heart for the ministry, I think, because so many of our partners are entrepreneurial, our team is entrepreneurial. He's quite an entrepreneur. And I think it just really resonated with him, as it so often does with people like that. And so he said, I want to help this ministry. I want to get behind it. And a few years ago, he formed an advisory group with some other fantastic San Antonio businessmen whose names you would probably know. And recently, they decided that they would form a 501c3 here out of San Antonio that just allows us to process donations more effectively. But more importantly, they're a prayer base for us. Chad's come with me to the Middle East and to Zimbabwe, so he speaks with authority and wisdom and knowledge about what we're doing. They pray for us. They care about us. They help us connect with other people, and they just really believe in our model. So, it's quite flattering for people from New Zealand. We're not typically well known on the world stage, but the humility for the great state of Texas to embrace what we're doing, that makes us feel kind of good. And we love taking folks to visit our partners. They speak for themselves, and they really are of the quality that the group here has really embraced them and love them.
Yeah, and there is a group here in San Antonio, so that listeners know that meets periodically and kind of gets updates from you and understands what's going on with the partners and that type of thing. And I know that, they've committed to providing a certain amount, of resourcing for you on a regular basis. And that's the San Antonio connection here, is that happens. And so very glad to have you here. Now, folks who want to reach out to your organization, what's the best way for them to do that?
So we have a website that has a lot of information, all of our partnerships, and tells all the stories. It's brighthopeworld.com. If you set your region to the USA, you can also find out about our local board here and how to donate. I also come and visit here in San Antonio every year, and that's usually, meeting with people who are interested. I love to just connect with people and tell the story. In a New Zealand kind of way, we're not particularly direct. We have never in our history asked for money. That's not what it's about. We just love telling stories of our partners. That's a commitment we make to them. So, as all New Zealanders are, I'm passionate about coffee. So if anyone says, hey, I'll meet you for coffee when you're in San Antonio, yeah, I'm there.
So we've got the brighthopeworld.com website. There's some videos on there that go over kind of your thought process on things. And I will say that for folks who have been exposed to philanthropy in the U.S., the approach is different. The approach is unique in that respect. And I think there's, some things that folks can learn from that approach that might be appropriate as well. So what I'm going to do now is kind of pivot the discussion a little bit about kind of what you see in the world and philanthropy and kind of what's working and what has its challenges and that type of thing, because you're in parts of the world where you're bumping up, you're coming alongside and maybe bumping up against NGOs and governments and those types of things that are, ostensibly trying to solve the issue that you're trying to solve, but maybe the approach is different, and sometimes they're complementary and sometimes not as much. So I don't know where we kind of want to start with that, but let's go. Where do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question, and we've been reflecting on this lately. I guess because so many of us are strategically wired, we're always looking ahead. We're taking a step back from the world and looking at what are the trends so that we can get ahead of them. And it would be fair to say that, around the world at the moment, there's a lot of troubling things. As we're recording this, the war in Ukraine is in full tilt. And while COVID is a nasty and distant memory for most of us, really the economic impacts of that are really still winding up around the world. As well, I was sharing some folks last night that, COVID really stimulated a really significant increase in both inflation and persecution in the developing world. It provided a good cover for governments to do some pretty awful things. It caused a spike in corruption around the world, which then caused a further spike in inflation. So we see that, in our view, the world is becoming more difficult. It is becoming less connected. So for us, our response to that has been to think that the time may come where there are more and more countries that one cannot readily travel to. Where to do so would be to put our partners at risk. We would consider India pretty close to that now. It's very difficult to get funds there. Other countries are following that lead. So our strategy has always been, but even more so now, is to start small, stay small. And, I know in the early conversations I had with the folks in Texas, there is a desire that, hey, man, if it works at this level, let's make it 10 times as big. Most of what we do is not scalable. We do a lot of small things because small things don't attract attention. Small things tend to avoid corruption. Small things can kind of travel under the radar. So we'll do, 100 little sewing programs or 50 microloans programs that really have nothing to do with each other, that we're the connector for. That's better than anything big that suddenly a government official becomes aware of and starts to look more closely at. Big is risky. We are also looking to really dial up our focus on local self-sustainability. So rather than us pushing funds in from outside, which, you're always risking dependency. There's more and more controls as to the movement of funds internationally. If we can stimulate local businesses like microloans programs, like a micro enterprise, things that can generate funds for ministry in country, that works better. And we really saw that during COVID where, when the world shut down, most of the work that we do carried on. It didn't affect a lot of our partners. In fact, a lot of them really geared up during that time frame. That for us was kind of a practice run, I guess. And we want to do more of that. Equip our partners to do what they do, whether or not we can go, whether or not we can get money there. I don't want to be pessimistic about it, but we tend to think in contingencies, and the mission space is not getting any easier.
No, it's certainly a place where you go to parts of the world where, you're always dealing with cultural differences to begin with. And then if those are being exacerbated by a local conflict, a local situation that's, we were talking about the Congo earlier, and, those types of things. Why don't you help explain just briefly what a microloan is?
Sure. Actually taking a step back, we actually do another thing now, which is even at a lower level than a microloan. So I'll start at that. We tend to form people together and do table banking now as a starter. So you will have a group in let's say a poor village, and they're wanting to grow their very small businesses. And so you get a group of people together, and these programs are typically run by women. They tend to do that better. They will set the rules of how they operate. And let's say we have 5 people and we all have $5. So we all bring it to the table, hence the term. And it's your turn this week, so you take that $25 away. And then next week we bring $1 and you're paying a little bit of interest on your loan. And all of the money is always being put on the table and someone's always taking it away. So it's kind of like a compulsory savings scheme. These work really well. They actually require nothing from us. We just help set them up. And then when that loan program has been run for, say, 6 months, they're doing well, then we'll say, here's $1,000. We'll put that on the table to help you increase what you're doing because you've proven yourself faithful. And so the loan group will meet usually every week, maybe every 2 weeks. They pay interest on their loans, which they set themselves, and that just helps offset inflation and build the loan pool. They will use it to run businesses and start businesses. It might be a little hairdressing salon. It might be a little grocery store, but that helps provide for their family. And one of the curious and you would think risky things that these groups tend to do is they hold themselves collectively accountable for the loans. So if something happens to you, if you can't pay your loan, we're all responsible for it. And you would think, well, that's a terrible idea. And it wasn't ours. This is where we lean on our partners. But what it does is it pulls this community together. And if you're struggling in your business, we come around you and we help you because we're all responsible. We've done dozens, hundreds maybe, of these small loan programs around the world. And when they're done like this, we will typically see a 100% repayment rate over time, over years, because they're just geared up. It works with the local culture. It makes sense to them, and it's transformational. And it might be that we do put 1,000, maybe 5,000 if it's a bigger loan program, but some of those loan pools might have $20,000 or $30,000 in them over time, might have 10 times as many people, and it's something that we seed and it grows. It's phenomenal.
Understood. And so I'm going to sit here and put on my skeptic's hat for a minute.
Please do.
And if you're just doing loans and they're all getting repaid, why do you need my money?
Why do I need your money?
Yeah.
Well, microloans are not the only thing we do, but where loans work in that village, well, we want to do them in the next village, and then we want to go to the next village, and there is no shortage of people that we want to do loans programs. But what I can tell you is we won't need your money for that loan program. Once that's up and going, it's away. But we're just looking to increase the width of what we're doing. That's what we get excited about. We would just want to help more and more people.
And you mentioned you've got a couple hundred current partners.
Yeah. We have 200 active partnerships.
And in terms of capacity, maybe keeping it small on an individual partnership basis. I know that, it takes you a while to get those partnerships up and running. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we're not particularly special as a ministry. We're not great marketers. We're not terribly clever, but we have one core competency, and that is we're really good at finding partners. We're really good at identifying those exceptional people of peace in a community, and God's been faithful to us and lead us to the right people. When we meet them, we will usually take a couple of years and get to know them. We'll visit them a few times or stay in their homes. Our wonderful new partnership facilitator, Kevin Honore, says, I will always outstay my welcome, and just see how they respond to it. And he tells a story where he's in India and we were connecting with a guy who wanted to start some work with young people. And he said they were walking along a dusty road, and this young person was chasing a football and tripped over in front of this guy. And he reached out with his foot and he shoved this kid off the dirt track. And, of course, that guy didn't become a partner. And he says, it's those little things you're kind of looking for. Like, who is this person? How are they regarded? And we put a lot of time into that upfront due diligence process. And sometimes for our partners are like, well, I don't know what's happening here. It's taken a long time. But then when we commit, we commit. We don't have a time limit. We've partnered with people for 20 plus years because they keep doing the work that God has called them to do. We'll just keep going on the journey. And, development takes decades. So we're not in a hurry. We're not going to abandon that person. If things go wrong, if there's a flood and everything gets destroyed, we're not going to abandon them. If they have a rough year, we're not going to abandon them because they're our partners. So we stick with them.
No, that's great. And earlier, Fraser was worried that, we wouldn't have subtitles, with his accent. I do need to clarify, by football, he meant soccer ball. There's a good friend I have his name's Mike Oakes at Oak Hills Church here in San Antonio. And we've talked a lot about this, about, the American insistence on calling it football, when I think it clearly should be called running throw ball, which is what is actually happening. I like that. As a former rugby player myself.
Wow.
I like that. But anyway, what's the question I didn't ask that you were hoping I would, or what do you want to conclude us with today?
Boy, I just love talking about this stuff. It gets in your blood, and when we meet these people, we spend time with them, we hear their stories. You realize what these folks are prepared to do and sacrifice for their communities. So, I would love to tell you many, many more stories about some of the people that we work with, and if you'll indulge me, I'd love to just tell one, which is a great ministry that we have in Zambia.
Sure.
And it tells a little bit of something about the time frames. So this is a ministry in a place called Chava, which is on the northern shores of Lake Benguelu in northern Zambia. And, we would consider this one of the poorest places that we operate. It is a really tough fishing village. The AIDS epidemic in the 90s, 2000s really decimated the population, particularly if people kind of my age. The Gen X just doesn't exist there. So you got a lot of older folks that are raising young kids and a lot of orphans. And so when we connected there, the churches had all got together in that community and said, we can't allow this orphan problem to continue. It's not right. So these people who, may be having one, maybe 2 meals a day at most, took in all these kids, even though they didn't have room. They said, we're going to bring them into our home and love them. And then they reached out to us and said, look, can you help us? The fish stocks are low in the lake. We're not farmers. Will you help us? So we got involved with them with a bunch of stuff, helping with the orphans and some food stuff. We helped them with sustainable agriculture, and we use a program called Foundations for Farming that came out of Zimbabwe that's amazing. And just we came alongside this community. And I remember visiting, I think it was about 2014, and this program was not going well. This community was not going well. We were putting a lot of money into it, more than $50,000 a year. It was, at the time, I think it was our biggest partnership. And our guy, Jerry Field, who looks after that partnership, said, I don't know what to do here. And so we had a meeting with the guy who ran the microloans program in that community. He was the treasurer of the microloans program, and his name was Judas, which is a tough name if you're a treasurer of something.
Indeed.
And he said, look, I've got a little tailoring business, but I'm going to give up that business. And I'm going to get a bicycle, and I'm just going to go around the community every day and just encourage people and help them with their farming. And Jerry and I tried to talk him out of it. We said, don't give up your business. That's a terrible idea. But he wouldn't hear it. And he threw in his business, and he focused his attention on encouraging the people. Well, a few years down the track from that, as a result of what this guy, our partner there, what he did in that community to lift the crop yields from maybe 1 ton per hectare to 8 or 9 tons per hectare. Now in that community, we pay for a little bit of training, maybe $1,000 each year. That's all the funds that we put into that community. The first of those orphans are off at university. That community has so much food, they're actually exporting it across the lake to other communities. And we got a letter from the head man a couple of years ago, and he said, I just wanted you guys to know that it's been a long time since I heard anyone use the word hunger in this community. That is a large community that is utterly transformed. And it really came down to one guy called Judas who said, I'm going to give up my job and focus on my community. And that's what our partners are like. That's what it's all about for us. What we do is not that special. What they do is very, very special indeed.
No, that's a beautiful story and a great way to kind of conclude here today. So I want to encourage folks to go to the website and see what Bright Hope World does. Also, if you're interested in getting in contact with Chad McNair, you can do that through me as well. So we can get you connected if that's something that you'd like to do.
So, wonderful.
On behalf of Philanthropy SA, thank you, Fraser, for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I just want to remind everybody to do well so you can do good.
Thank you for joining us at Philanthropy SA. We hope you found something to inspire you during today's conversation. If you know organizations and people who are making an impact in the community, we would love to hear about it. Until next time, do well so you can do good.